The ocean begins with silence, and in that silence, it holds stories that have no end. Vast waters stretch beyond sight, a surface that seems calm but conceals an abyss below. The cold depths have always unsettled human imagination, a reminder that beneath the waves lies a world where human presence is fragile, where machines and men can be swallowed whole without resistance. The sea does not reveal what it takes, it does not echo back what falls into its embrace. Entire vessels have disappeared beneath it without leaving a ripple, as if time itself agreed to erase their presence. The submarine is the perfect paradox in this landscape. Built to vanish, it exists to escape detection, to glide silently under the surface like a shadow among shadows. Yet there are moments when this design meets its mirror, and the vessel vanishes not by intention but by fate. A disappearance so complete that steel, crew, and purpose dissolve into water's darkness. There is no trail, no drifting debris, no clear sign of ending. What remains is a silence that extends from the seabed to the families waiting on distant shores. This silence becomes part of the ocean's archive. For centuries, humanity has turned to the sea with ambition and fear, hoping to master its surface while never understanding its depths. Each vanishing submarine is another entry in that archive, sealed in pressure and darkness. Some are explained with time and technology, wrecks located decades later. Others remain only as coordinates never reached, stories told in fragments, mysteries that grow heavier as the years stretch on. To drift into these stories is not to demand answers but to sit with uncertainty. The ocean does not bargain with curiosity. It invites patience, reflection, and humility. Every unexplained disappearance is a reminder of how little is known, even in an age of satellites and sonar. To listen to these mysteries is to accept the unknown not as failure but as a companion. In this way, the sea becomes both a grave and a storyteller, whispering only what it chooses, keeping the rest in the calm silence of the deep. The idea of traveling beneath the surface of the sea has always carried with it a sense of quiet wonder and unease. Long before the modern submarine, there were sketches and fantasies of vessels that could glide unseen through the hidden corridors of the ocean. To slip below the waves was to vanish from the world of sunlight, to move into a realm where only silence ruled. When the first true submarines took form, they carried more than steel and machinery. They carried the weight of human desire to disappear, to move where no eye could follow. These early vessels were fragile, often more experiment than certainty, and yet they revealed a possibility that changed the imagination of the sea. Over time, submarines evolved into shadows that could patrol unseen, their presence guessed at but never confirmed. They were conceived not only as weapons but as instruments of endurance and secrecy. Each descent beneath the waves was a journey into isolation, where crew members lived in dim corridors, cut off from the world above, hearing only the hum of machinery and the muffled pressure of water pressing against the hull. That hull itself becomes a symbol. Made of hardened steel, it stands between life and the crushing force of the abyss. Every meter downward adds invisible weight, every dive a test of trust between man and machine. A submarine is both fortress and coffin, a place where survival depends on the careful balance of pressure, air, and silence. The ocean waits outside, patient and endless, pressing against walls that cannot falter. In that pressure lies vulnerability, the awareness that one small fracture can undo everything. To see submarines as shadows is to see them in their truest form. They slip beneath the surface not to be admired but to be forgotten, moving without ripple, their paths erased by the ocean the moment they pass. They embody secrecy, but they also embody fragility. Their very design, meant to disappear, makes their permanent vanishing more haunting. When they do not return, when they pass beneath the waves never to be seen again, their absence feels like the fulfillment of their purpose taken too far. The silence of the abyss magnifies that absence. For those left above, there is no wreckage drifting back, no signal echoing upward. The sea closes as though nothing had disturbed it at all. Submarines are built as shadows, and when they vanish completely, they become part of the darkness they were meant to navigate. Their mystery lingers, not only as a record of loss, but as a reminder of how deep and final silence can be beneath the waves. A submarine does not vanish in only one way. The ocean offers many paths into silence, each different, yet all final. Some disappearances are sudden and violent, marked by a catastrophic implosion. A single failure of steel against pressure can reduce a vessel into fragments scattered across the seabed. To those above, it feels like an instant. One moment a submarine exists, the next, only silence remains. Nothing rises to the surface, no cry carries upward, only a void where sound should be. Others slip away slowly, drifting without power into darkness. A system may fail, oxygen may thin, batteries may weaken, and the crew becomes aware of their descent into a fate they cannot alter. These vessels do not announce their end. They simply do not return, resting on ocean floors where they remain untouched for decades. The sea claims them quietly, folding them into its endless layers of current and pressure. War adds its own mysteries. In combat, submarines can vanish without witness, destroyed beneath the chaos of surface battles. Their fate becomes lost in the confusion of reports, their final hours unknown. Training missions, meant to prepare for danger, sometimes echo war's silence. A routine dive, a standard patrol, can end with the same absence as battle. Families wait for a return that never comes, and questions linger long after the official explanations fade. The ocean itself becomes the keeper of these secrets. It holds every wreck and every unanswered question within its depth. Some answers arrive decades later, when technology reaches further and wrecks are rediscovered. Others remain sealed in pressure, unyielding. To understand submarine vanishings is not to solve them, but to recognize that the sea is patient, and in its patience, it chooses what to reveal and what to keep hidden. In the spring of 1968, the USS Scorpion set out on what seemed a familiar assignment, carrying 99 men into the Atlantic. It was a nuclear-powered submarine, a vessel built for stealth, meant to pass beneath the waves without notice. Yet somewhere on its homeward path, silence replaced signal, and the Scorpion never returned. Families waited at docksides and bases, watching horizons that remained empty, their patience slowly hardening into grief. The vessel's absence became one of the most haunting disappearances of the Cold War. The questions began almost immediately. There were intercepted Soviet messages hinting at submarine losses, whispers that the Scorpion had been shadowed or struck down. Yet no evidence rose to the surface. There were reports of sudden explosions recorded by underwater listening systems, sounds so deep and sharp they seemed to mark the instant when steel surrendered to pressure. But even these were only fragments, clues without resolution. No official voice offered clarity. Instead, silence filled the space where answers might have lived. Over time, the Scorpion became more than a single tragedy. It became an emblem of uncertainty, a reminder that beneath the ocean, even in an age of satellites and global navies, events could unfold unseen. Theories multiplied: a torpedo malfunction, a collision, hostile action. Each theory circled the same absence, none able to fully explain why 99 men did not return. What remained was not scandal but echo, the sound of unanswered questions carried by families, sailors, and historians alike. The Scorpion rests now in the depths of the Atlantic, a steel tomb sealed by darkness. Its story continues, not in the details of what happened, but in the stillness that surrounds it. In the end, its disappearance is less about cause than about the weight of the unknown, an uncertainty that has never lifted, echoing through the decades like the distant sound of waves against a quiet shore. On a clear April morning in 1963, the USS Thresher slipped beneath the surface for what was meant to be a routine test dive. She was the pride of the American submarine fleet, a nuclear-powered vessel designed to explore deeper than any that had come before. Yet only hours later, silence replaced her signals, and the sea closed over the place where she had been. 129 men vanished, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than sound itself. The story of the Thresher is not only about human loss but about the fragile balance between technology and nature. Her hull, built of steel and engineering confidence, was pressed against the eternal weight of water. Pressure has no mercy, and even the strongest metal weakens under its steady hand. A pipe can fail, a joint can crack, and in seconds, the sea can claim what took years to build. For families ashore, answers came slowly, scattered like faint sonar pings in the distance. Early reports gave little clarity, and the cause remained speculation for years. Some believed flaws in the design doomed her, others whispered about metal fatigue or failed systems. The truth was less about a single error and more about the ocean's indifference. Where humans see triumph in achievement, the water remains unmoved, pressing down without end, erasing confidence in an instant. The Thresher's story lingers because it embodies a truth, that beneath the surface, every submarine carries both strength and vulnerability. Technology can defy the ocean only for so long before silence returns to claim its place. The Thresher became a reminder of how thin the line is between control and collapse, and how quickly human achievement can dissolve into the stillness of the deep. In March of 1968, the Soviet submarine K-129 set out across the Pacific, carrying its crew into waters far from home. It was a vessel armed with nuclear missiles, designed for stealth and strength, yet somewhere between its departure and its expected return, it disappeared without a trace. No distress call was heard, No debris field marked its resting place. For the Soviet Navy, its absence was immediate and profound, a submarine gone, along with all its men, into the silence of the deep. The Cold War gave the mystery sharper edges. At a time when every movement of fleets was monitored, how could such a vessel simply vanish? Some believed it suffered an internal failure, a malfunction that left it helpless to the immense pressure of the sea. Others speculated it collided with the American submarine USS Swordfish, meeting its end in a hidden confrontation. Yet none of these theories were ever confirmed, and the uncertainty thickened with each passing month. American intelligence soon took interest. In 1974, under extraordinary secrecy, the CIA launched what became known as Project Azorian. Using a specially built ship, they attempted to raise the sunken K-129 from the Pacific floor, 3 miles beneath the surface. The effort was immense, like a ritual carried out in silence at the edge of human possibility. For a brief moment, steel long lost to darkness rose again toward the light, but the ocean resisted. Much of the submarine slipped back into the abyss, returning to the quiet that had claimed it years before. The fate of K-129 remains layered in speculation and silence. Did it fall to accident, to confrontation, or to the implacable weight of water pressing in from all sides? No conclusion holds firm. What endures is the sense of an enigma, a submarine that vanished in the height of global tension, a secret carried by the Pacific, kept within its vast and indifferent depths. In January of 1968, the French submarine Minerve set out from Toulon on a short exercise in the Mediterranean. She was a small, agile vessel, carrying 52 men, her journey meant to last only a few hours. Yet as the coast faded behind her, so too did her presence. She never returned, and no message signaled distress. One moment, she was part of the fleet. The next, she was a silence in the sea. The search began quickly, ships and aircraft scouring the waters near Toulon. Families gathered at ports and bases, waiting for news that never came. The Mediterranean, so often seen as a familiar and well-mapped sea, seemed to absorb the Minerve without trace. Days of searching became weeks, and then the effort quieted. The ocean had chosen not to give back what it had taken. For decades, the Minerve lived only in memory, her resting place unknown. Time passed, and generations carried the absence with them. The sea kept its patience, holding the submarine in a darkness untouched by light or exploration. Only in 2019, more than 50 years later, was the Minerve finally rediscovered. Resting at a depth where the pressure of silence outweighed the questions of men, she emerged again into history, though not into life. Her disappearance, and her late rediscovery, serve as a reminder that the sea moves to its own rhythm. Some mysteries last for days, others for centuries, but in the end, it is the water that decides when to yield them. The Minerve's long silence is not only a story of loss but a reflection of the ocean's patience, mysteries sleeping for half a century before finally stirring awake. 2 years after the loss of the Minerve, tragedy struck the French Navy again. In March of 1970, the submarine Eurydice departed from Saint-Tropez for a routine training exercise. She carried 57 men, experienced sailors familiar with the calm surface and shifting moods of the Mediterranean. Yet not long after her dive, contact ceased. The submarine vanished, and with her, another crew was absorbed into the silence of the sea. Search efforts began at once. Aircraft and ships combed the waters, sonar swept across the seabed, but only fragments were ever found, scattered pieces of wreckage that hinted at catastrophe but gave no full account. Families gathered on the southern coast of France, staring out at waters that seemed both familiar and suddenly unknowable. They waited for word, but the sea offered no explanation, only fragments carried back by the tide. The disappearance of the Eurydice so soon after the Minerve deepened the grief of a nation. 2 submarines lost in 2 years, both in the same sea, turned the Mediterranean into a place of mourning. To the families, there was no comfort in the idea of routine tragedy. They were left with questions that could not be answered, standing on shores where silence became their only reply. The Eurydice's loss reinforces the truth that even in seas thought to be mapped and measured, mystery endures. The Mediterranean, bordered by cities and watched by nations, held its secrets close. The submarine did not return, and the ocean did not yield its reasons. What remained were names, faces, and memories, a quiet story carried not by the water, but by those left ashore, their grief as endless as the horizon they faced. In April of 1951, the British submarine HMS Affray left Portsmouth for what should have been a routine training exercise. She carried 7 to 5 men, a mix of naval crew and trainees, moving into the English Channel on a night calm with spring air. There was no battle to fight, no enemy lurking nearby, only practice dives and drills meant to prepare her for future missions. Yet by dawn, silence replaced signal, and the affray did not return. Her disappearance unsettled Britain in a way that war losses had not. The conflict was over, peace had returned, and yet a vessel was gone without reason, swallowed by waters that lay within sight of home. Search parties scoured the channel, sonar swept the depths, and surface ships listened for signals that never came. For days, hope flickered in the belief that the crew might still be alive, trapped but waiting. But as time passed, that hope dimmed, replaced by the weight of certainty. When the affray was finally located, the reasons for her sinking remained unclear. Some spoke of a snapped snorkel mast, others of equipment failure, but none of these explanations fully erased the unease. In the silence that followed, rumors began to cling to her name. Whispers of sabotage and haunting passed between sailors, as though mystery itself had entered the vessel and refused to leave. The affray became Britain's last submarine disaster, and her story endured not only because of the loss but because of its timing. A disappearance in peace felt more haunting than one in war, a reminder that danger lingers even when no enemy is near. The channel, so familiar and so heavily traveled, kept her secret. And though wreckage was found, the questions around her sinking never entirely left. The affray's name remains tied to a lingering shadow, a post-war unease that has never fully lifted. In February of 1942, the French submarine Succouf sailed into the Caribbean, carrying both pride and unease. She was no ordinary vessel. Built as the world's largest submarine cruiser, she towered over others of her kind, armed not only with torpedoes but with heavy guns mounted in a turret. Designed to patrol the seas like a silent battleship, she embodied both ambition and vulnerability. Yet her size did not protect her from the silence of disappearance. Somewhere between Bermuda and the Panama Canal, the Succouf was lost, leaving only questions behind. Reports suggested she may have collided at night with an American freighter, the Thompson Likes, which reported striking something large in the water. Others speculated about sabotage, hinting at tension between Free French forces and their allies. Still others imagined a secret attack, a deliberate removal of a submarine whose loyalties were clouded in wartime uncertainty. Each explanation pointed toward an end, but none were proven. The Succouf's wreck was never recovered, and the Caribbean's blue waters closed over her vast frame without offering clarity. The disappearance carried an air of irony. The Caribbean, far from the main battlegrounds of the Second World War, was seen as relatively safe. Here, convoys moved, supplies traveled, and Allied forces passed with a sense of security. Yet it was in this space of supposed calm that the Succouf vanished. Her fate seemed more like a ghost story than a casualty of war, a giant submarine, capable of immense power, simply erased in a single night. For decades, her absence lingered in memory. Families of the crew spoke of betrayal and secrecy, of governments that did not reveal what they knew. Divers dreamed of finding her, but the ocean never yielded her grave. The Succouf's story remains one of shadow, a vessel too large to be forgotten, too lost to be found, swallowed by waters that were meant to be safe. During the Second World War, the Mediterranean was more than a corridor of commerce and empire. It became a silent battlefield beneath the waves. Italy, with its long coasts and strategic harbors, sent dozens of submarines into these waters. Some departed from ports like La Spezia or Taranto and never returned. Others were last seen on patrol, their positions lost in the shifting tides of war. Their ends were rarely witnessed, their wrecks rarely found. One by one, they dissolved into the sea's vast blue silence, until entire fleets seemed to vanish. The Mediterranean is a sea surrounded by history, bordered by nations and crowded with ships that trace roots as old as civilization itself. Yet during those years, it also became a graveyard. Beneath the waves, the hulls of submarines settled quietly, unseen by those who crossed the surface. The waters that carried trade for millennia also carried absence, holding the unmarked tombs of sailors whose stories ended without a final chapter. For Italy, the losses were heavy, yet often unspoken. In the chaos of war, submarines that never returned were listed in reports and remembered by families, but their locations became only coordinates guessed at, never confirmed. Even after peace returned, many of these submarines remained hidden, their steel eroded by salt, their crews part of the seabed's silence. To reflect on these vanished fleets is to recognize the Mediterranean not as a familiar holiday sea of sunlight and commerce, but as a place of laid sorrow. Beneath the ferries, fishing boats, and cargo ships of today lie the remains of vessels that once carried ambition and fear. The Mediterranean is not only a bridge between continents, It is also a cemetery of unseen hulls, where the shadows of entire fleets rest quietly, unmarked and unspoken, in the eternal blue. In June of 1940, the Dutch submarine O13 left port for a patrol in the North Sea and slipped quietly into history. She was one of the last of her nation's vessels still operating after the German invasion of the Netherlands, carrying her crew into waters shadowed by war. Yet after her departure, no signal followed. She simply vanished, leaving no trace behind, no wreckage to wash ashore, no survivors to tell the final moments. The loss of the O13 carried the weight of tragedy, yet it was a quieter grief than that of larger navies. Britain, Germany, and the United States dominated headlines with their own disappearances and victories, and in the storm of global war, the vanishing of a Dutch submarine received little notice. But for the families waiting in harbors, and for a navy already pressed thin, her absence was no less devastating. A smaller fleet meant each loss was felt more keenly, and each mystery more profound. Over the years, theories rose and faded. Some believed she struck a mine, one of the many scattered invisibly across the contested waters of the North Sea. Others suggested a collision with a British submarine, the fog of war erasing allies as easily as enemies. Still others whispered of a silent attack from which no call could be made. Yet none of these explanations were ever confirmed. The O13 remains unrecovered, her position unknown, her final story untold. Her mystery endures as one of the Second World War's unresolved disappearances. The North Sea, shallow in places and endlessly patrolled, seems too small to hide such a vessel, yet it has. The O13's fate rests beneath those shifting grey waters, another reminder that war leaves not only scars above the surface, but also absences below, absences that remain, waiting in silence, long after the guns have gone quiet. In August of 2000, the Russian submarine Kursk prepared for exercises in the Barents Sea. She was a pride of the fleet, a massive nuclear vessel, thought to be strong enough to withstand anything the ocean might bring. Yet during those exercises, something went terribly wrong. A sudden explosion shook the water, followed by another more powerful blast. On the surface, ships registered the shock, but below, silence settled where signals should have been. The Kursk did not respond. The official explanation spoke of a torpedo malfunction, a chain of fire and blast that tore through compartments. But beyond technical language lies the human weight of the disaster. Inside the damaged hull, some sailors survived the initial catastrophe. They gathered in the dark, writing notes to loved ones, waiting in a space where light had failed but duty still held them together. The sea pressed against the walls, the oxygen thinned, and time became unbearable. Their silence was not immediate but drawn out, a patience forced upon them as rescue stumbled far above. On the surface, families waited for news, their questions answered with hesitant words, delayed announcements, and official uncertainty. Days passed before divers reached the submarine, and by then, life inside had already faded into stillness. The sorrow was not only in the loss but in the waiting, the sense that voices were trapped just beyond reach, extinguished by the slow passage of hours. The Kursk's tragedy is remembered less as a technical failure and more as a human silence. 94 meters below the surface, men endured their last hours in darkness while the world above hesitated. The ocean kept them, and when the wreck was raised, the mystery was not what happened mechanically, but what it felt like to wait in that crushing stillness, breathing against time, until no breath remained. In April of 2021, the Indonesian submarine Nanggala began a training exercise off the coast of Bali. She was an aging vessel, built in the late 1970s, yet still carrying the pride of her crew and the hopes of a nation that trusted her strength. 53 men were aboard, their task routine, their path familiar. But soon after her dive, contact ceased. Calls went unanswered, signals faded into silence, and the Nanggala did not return to the surface. The search began immediately, drawing in ships and aircraft from across the region. Nations sent support, deploying sonar, sensors, and advanced equipment. Satellites hovered above, mapping currents and tracing possible locations. Yet despite all this technology, the sea resisted. 4 days, the ocean gave nothing back. Families kept vigil, holding on to fragments of hope that air pockets might sustain life within the hull. But as time passed, hope thinned, and the truth emerged with painful clarity. When the wreckage was finally located, it lay in 3 broken sections, scattered on the seabed at depths beyond human rescue. The immense pressure of the deep had crushed the vessel, sealing the fate of all aboard in moments. No system, no preparation, no watchful eye from space could prevent what the ocean had already claimed. The loss of the Nangula reminded the world that even in modern times, with satellites circling overhead and sonar mapping the seabed, the sea maintains dominion. It is a force that does not yield to technology, a keeper of silence that remains beyond reach. 53 men vanished not in the distant past, but in the present age, and their absence is a reminder that the ocean's power endures. What we build, no matter how advanced, remains fragile beneath the crushing weight of water and time. In November of 2017, the Argentine submarine ARA San Juan set sail from Ushuaia on what was to be a routine patrol along the South Atlantic. She carried 44 crew members, men and women who had grown accustomed to the rhythm of dives and resurfacings, to the stillness of life lived beneath the sea. The vessel had faced repairs and challenges in the past, but there was trust in her endurance, trust that she would return as she always had. Yet within days, that trust faltered. Communication ceased. The San Juan slipped into silence, and Argentina entered a long vigil of waiting. The first reports suggested a technical problem, a failure in her battery system that released hydrogen gas. It was an issue the crew had noted before, one they had managed and repaired. But this time, the problem escalated beyond control. Somewhere beneath the waves, the submarine faltered, and moments later, listening stations around the world detected an unusual sound, a violent noise consistent with an implosion. While technology heard what had happened, it could not reveal where. For the families ashore, absence stretched into days, then weeks. Coastal towns lit candles, gathered in prayer, and held on to fragile hope. They imagined their loved ones still alive, trapped but waiting, counting hours in air that was slowly running out. Governments promised answers, and ships from across the globe joined the search, yet the sea gave nothing. The Atlantic, vast and unmoved, concealed the San Juan in its depths, turning every passing day into a reminder of helplessness. It would take more than a year before the submarine was finally located. Resting more than 900 meters below the surface, she was found broken, cradled in darkness. The discovery confirmed what many had long feared, but it also gave shape to grief that had lingered in uncertainty. The San Juan's loss was not only a tragedy of steel and systems but of human patience. The waiting, the unanswered prayers, the silence endured by families who watched the horizon and listened for voices that would never return. Across the oceans of the world, there are submarines that left port and never returned, vessels that exist now only as names on naval lists and in the memories of families who still wait for closure. These are the submarines never found, their resting places unknown, their endings unrecovered. Some may lie in trenches so deep that no light has touched them since the day they sank. Others may rest in shallower waters, hidden under layers of sand and silt, erased from sight by the quiet persistence of the sea. To speak of them is to speak of absence. Each submarine carried men whose stories ended without witness, their final hours swallowed by water too heavy for words to reach. There are no wrecks to dive, no memorials that mark an exact location. For their loved ones, memory itself becomes the grave, a place where names are repeated, where silence must serve as the only reply. Dozens remain unaccounted for, from wartime patrols lost in sudden battles to training dives that never surfaced, to missions cloaked in secrecy whose failures were never admitted. Some may have been destroyed by mines, others by collisions, still others by accidents that left no trace. Yet without discovery, these remain only guesses. The ocean does not confirm, it only holds. In time, the unknown becomes myth. Stories pass down of submarines that may still drift somewhere, or of steel hulls preserved in cold darkness like artifacts of another age. Fishermen claim to have seen shadows that vanish. Sonar operators hear echoes where no vessel exists. Such tales are not evidence, but they are a way of acknowledging what has been lost, of giving form to what remains unseen. The submarines never found are reminders that the sea is vast beyond measure, and that even in an age of satellites and sonar, mystery endures. They have become part of the seabed, part of the ocean's silence, part of myth itself, fragments of human ambition folded into the deep, waiting in places we may never reach. Across the long history of submarines, some disappearances seem to resist even the most practical explanations, and in that resistance, theories arise. The ocean does not always offer straightforward answers, and where silence endures, imagination begins to drift. These theories do not claim certainty. They move like currents, possibilities that pass quietly through thought, never anchored but never entirely dismissed. One speaks of magnetic anomalies. The Earth's fields are not steady lines but shifting patterns, bending and twisting in ways not always understood. A submarine relying on instruments could find itself misled, its navigation drawn astray by unseen distortions. Some imagine such anomalies pulling vessels off course, leaving them wandering until they vanish into depths unmarked. Others turn to the seabed itself. Methane hydrates, frozen into layers of sediment, can erupt suddenly when disturbed. Released gas can reduce buoyancy, destabilizing even large vessels. In theory, a submarine could be caught in such a sudden exhalation of the Earth, dragged downward in a moment of imbalance. These eruptions, rare and unpredictable, remind us of the ocean's quiet volatility. There are also whispers of underwater landslides, movements of Earth along the continental shelves that shift with immense force. Such collapses could bury wrecks under silt, hiding them from detection for decades. A submarine caught near such an event would leave no visible trace, its steel hull folded into shifting terrain. None of these ideas replace fact. They linger instead as gentle acknowledgments that the ocean is more complex than human plans. Theories like these do not resolve mysteries but expand them, reminding us that disappearance is not always a matter of machines alone. Nature, in its silence, holds powers we still cannot fully measure. These possibilities drift like kelp in current, not answers, but reminders of how much remains beyond knowing. The Bermuda Triangle has long been a place where mystery and imagination meet. Stretching roughly between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, this patch of ocean has been credited with swallowing ships, planes, and even submarines. Some of the world's vanishings have been linked, however loosely, to this expanse, giving rise to stories of compasses spinning, engines failing, and vessels fading without a call. Yet when looked at closely, these stories reveal not so much proof of a supernatural force as a reflection of how little we truly know of the sea. Submarines, in particular, have added to this lore. When a vessel vanishes without trace, its silence is easily folded into the myth of the triangle. A patrol that never returned, a sudden loss of signal, a wreck never located, each absence feels at home in waters already marked by legend. Families and sailors, seeking understanding, sometimes turn to myths when science offers no clear answer. The idea of a cursed place or a strange force becomes a way of speaking about the unknowable, a language of story filling the space left by silence. To approach these connections softly is to see them not as sensational claims but as human responses. The ocean is vast, and its depths remain largely unexplored. Myths such as the Bermuda Triangle are not explanations, but acknowledgments of mystery. They remind us that even in an age of satellites and science, we lean toward wonder when faced with what cannot be explained. The submarines said to have vanished here rest in the same silence as others across the globe. Their link to the triangle may be more symbolic than factual, but symbols have their power. They tell us that the sea is not fully ours, that it holds its secrets in ways beyond our grasp. In the end, the Bermuda Triangle is less a curse and more a mirror, reflecting our awareness of how little we truly know of the oceans that surround us. Long before steel hulls and nuclear engines, the human imagination was already traveling beneath the sea. Ancient stories spoke of vessels that could slip under the surface, entering the hidden world below as easily as ships sailed the waves above. These myths and legends, scattered across cultures, form a quiet prelude to the submarines of our own time, carrying the same mix of wonder, ambition, and unease. In tales of Alexander the Great, he is said to have descended into the ocean in a glass bell, lowered into the depths to observe the mysteries of fish and darkness. Whether truth or invention, the image endures, a figure peering out at the silent world beneath the waves, seeing what few had seen before. In Chinese lore, stories tell of dragon-shaped vessels that swam through rivers and seas, vessels of emperors and sages, moving like living creatures below the surface. These stories blurred invention and reverence, blending the sea's creatures with human craft. Legends from the Middle East and India speak of men traveling underwater in sealed containers, carried with them as they explored where light could not reach. Even in Norse sagas and European folklore, there are whispers of vessels that belonged to the deep, ships that vanished beneath the waves and reappeared far away, as though carried by hidden channels. These myths are not technical manuals, but reflections of longing. They suggest that the idea of submersion, of moving in the quiet darkness below the sea, has always haunted the human mind. What today is steel and sonar was once imagination and story, vessels shaped not by engineering but by dream. To remember these ancient submersibles is to recognize that vanishing into the ocean is not a modern fear. It is part of a lineage of thought, where the sea has always been seen as both gateway and grave. The legends remind us that the mysteries of submarines did not begin with their invention. They were already waiting in the stories we told, quietly preparing us for disappearances yet to come. From time to time, fishermen tell of shapes beneath their boats that cannot be explained. On calm nights, When the sea is still and the nets drift in silence, they speak of long shadows moving just below the surface, silhouettes shaped like submarines though no vessel is meant to be there. At other times, sonar screens show blips that appear and vanish, as though a ship had briefly crossed the line of detection before dissolving into nothing. These sightings are not written into official naval records, yet they linger in the folklore of coasts where the sea has always been both provider and mystery. Some stories tell of phantom periscopes breaking the surface, rising for an instant before sinking back into the water with no trace left behind. Others describe the faint hum of engines felt through wooden hulls, vibrations in the water as if something massive had passed close by, though no ship was ever seen. These experiences are passed along in quiet tones, told not as certainty but as wonder, a way of acknowledging the sea's strangeness. Skeptics explain such accounts as errors, sonar interference, shadows of whales, tricks of current and light. These explanations are likely true much of the time. Yet even so, the tales persist. They grow in the telling, becoming part of a larger myth of ghost submarines, vessels that once sank into silence but occasionally rise again in imagination. For those who hear them, these stories are less about fact than about presence. They are a way of keeping memory alive, of giving form to the lost submarines whose resting places are unknown. If the sea sometimes offers a shadow or a sound, then perhaps it is a reminder that the vanished fleet is not entirely gone, that absence itself has a shape. Whether error, illusion, or something more, ghost submarines drift in folklore like echoes across water, part of the vanished fleet of the human mind. In July of 1942, the USS Grunion was assigned to patrol the remote Aleutian Islands, a chain of windswept rocks stretching into the North Pacific. It was her first war patrol, a chance for her crew to prove themselves in waters where Japanese forces were beginning to press. The submarine reported sightings, engaged enemy targets, and then, without warning, went silent. No signal marked her fate, no survivor returned to speak of her last dive. For decades, the Grunion remained a mystery, one more vessel listed as lost, cause unknown. The families of the 90-man crew carried that silence for generations. Wives and children grew old without answers, their lives marked by the absence of clarity. The Navy offered only fragments, patrol logs ending abruptly, scattered intelligence that hinted at combat but not conclusion. For those left behind, the grief stretched on, unanswered. Each year the questions deepened, carried across time like the tide, but the ocean gave nothing back. The mystery might have remained forever, but the determination of the skipper's sons kept the story alive. Decades later, they launched their own search, driven not by governments or fleets but by family devotion. In 2006, their efforts finally bore fruit. The wreck of the Grunion was located beneath the waves. After 64 years, the silence lifted just enough to give a place to grief, a final resting ground to imagine. The long absence of the Grunion is as much the story as her discovery. She reminds us that disappearance is not only a moment of loss, but a stretch of time carried forward by those left waiting. The sea can keep its secrets for half a lifetime, and when it finally yields them, the mystery does not end. It becomes part of memory, a silence spanning generations before breaking softly into light. In February of 1944, the USS Greyback set out on patrol near Okinawa, tasked with intercepting Japanese shipping lanes. She was a strong and seasoned submarine, already credited with successful attacks, her crew confident in the quiet craft of underwater warfare. But after sending what would be her last transmission, she vanished. Days stretched into weeks with no return, and in time, she was declared lost with all 80 crew members. For the families at home, there was no wreck, no resting place to name. Instead, the crew of the Greyback became etched into marble memorials, their names carved into stone as a way of holding them in memory. Generations passed, and the submarine became less a vessel than a rumor, her position lost to shifting records and the uncertainty of war. Some believed she had gone down in one place, others in another, but none could say with certainty where she lay. The ocean had erased her position, blurring coordinates into silence. For 75 years, she remained hidden, a steel warship reduced to little more than whispers in naval archives. Then, in 2019, explorers finally rediscovered her resting place off Okinawa. The wreck was upright, preserved by the depths, her story confirmed at last. The moment of rediscovery was not dramatic but reflective, a quiet confirmation that memory and reality had met again after decades apart. The Greyback's story shows the patience of the sea. What had been erased for generations, hidden beneath currents and time, was still there, waiting. Her rediscovery does not undo the silence that came before, nor does it erase the years when she was only a name on a wall. Instead, It reminds us that the ocean keeps both secrets and vessels alike, reducing steel to shadow until the day it chooses to give them back. In October of 1943, the USS Dorado set out from New London, Connecticut, on her maiden voyage to Panama. She was a new submarine, crewed by 7 to 7 men, heading south through waters that were not considered especially dangerous. Yet after she left port, she was never heard from again. No signals marked her journey, no arrival greeted her at the canal. What was meant to be a routine transfer became a disappearance that lingers with unease. Theories soon arose. One possibility suggested that the Dorado had been the victim of friendly fire. U.S. patrol aircraft in the area had dropped depth charges on a suspected submarine, though their targets were never confirmed. Some believe the Dorado may have been mistaken for an enemy vessel, destroyed in error by those meant to protect her path. Another theory pointed to mines, newly laid by German U-boats along the route, invisible dangers waiting beneath the surface. Others speculated about mechanical failure, a hidden weakness that revealed itself far from help. What makes the Dorado's absence particularly haunting is the environment in which it occurred. These were not the remote depths of the Pacific, nor the far reaches of Arctic waters. The Caribbean and Western Atlantic were busy routes, traveled and charted, yet no trace of her was ever recovered. Families waited along the coastlines of both North and South America, their hopes slowly dimming as weeks turned into silence. The Dorado remains unrecovered, her location unknown, her end only guessed at. In shallow waters where discovery might have seemed inevitable, she lingers still as a mystery. Her disappearance is not marked by grand battle or storm, but by absence itself, a vessel that simply left one shore and never reached the next, a routine journey transformed into a permanent silence. During the Second World War, Japan built some of the most ambitious submarines the world had ever seen. These were the I-boats, massive vessels designed not only to carry torpedoes but in some cases to launch aircraft from their decks. They were symbols of innovation and reach, crafted to extend naval power across the Pacific. Their presence was intended to project strength, to show that Japan could strike from beneath the waves as well as from above them. Yet ambition met the indifference of the sea, and many of these submarines never returned from their missions. Some vanished in combat, destroyed by depth charges or aircraft, their wrecks slipping quietly into the trenches of the Pacific. Others disappeared without witnesses, their fates never confirmed, their patrol routes ending in silence. The ocean erased their positions so completely that even with post-war records, no final certainty could be drawn. Families received little more than notices, names written on memorials instead of graves. What had been symbols of power became unanswered questions, their steel frames dissolving unseen in the dark. The loss of the I-boats reflected more than individual tragedies. They marked the unraveling of Japan's naval empire. Each submarine that failed to return weakened the illusion of invincibility, showing that even the largest and most advanced machines could not escape the weight of war and water. By the war's end, many of these giants rested broken and silent at the bottom of the Pacific, scattered across seas that once carried their ambition outward. Today, divers and historians still search for them, drawn by both curiosity and respect. A few have been found, lying rusted in deep valleys, their vast shapes softened by decades of current and coral. Many more remain hidden, reminders that the Pacific is wide enough to swallow even the largest of machines. The I-boats, once symbols of reach and ambition, are now part of the quiet collapse of empire, steel giants resting unseen in trenches that guard their silence. In October of 1986, the Soviet submarine K-219 was patrolling the North Atlantic, carrying nuclear missiles as part of the tense balance of the Cold War. She was a vessel built for endurance and secrecy, but on this patrol, something went fatally wrong. A missile tube began leaking, seawater entering where it should never have been. The crew fought to contain the problem, but the ocean pressed harder, and in the end, the submarine could not be saved. She sank slowly into the depths, taking several sailors with her, and leaving the rest adrift in lifeboats, watching their vessel vanish beneath the waves. Survivors told of smoke, of flooding compartments, of desperate efforts to control the situation. Some accounts hinted at a collision with an American submarine shadowing the K-219, a sudden strike that may have triggered the disaster. Official voices denied this, offering explanations of mechanical failure, of poor seals and flawed systems. Between testimony and silence, between memory and politics, the truth grew uncertain, shaped as much by secrecy as by fact. For those who lived, the memory was not one of theories but of survival. They recalled the heat of fire, the taste of poisoned air, the fear of pressure mounting as systems failed. They remembered watching comrades who never escaped, their lives sealed within the hull. For the families of the dead, answers came wrapped in official statements that spoke of accident but avoided deeper questions. The K-219 now rests on the seabed, her nuclear missiles entombed with her, an enduring relic of a time when the ocean carried the shadows of global rivalry. Her story is told in fragments, survivors' voices, state denials, and the silence of the Atlantic itself. Whether she sank by accident, by collision, or by a combination of both, the end remains unresolved. Like so many submarines before her, the K-219 slipped beneath the waves into a silence that does not explain, but only endures. In April of 1989, the Soviet submarine K-278 Komsomolets was at sea in the Norwegian Sea, a vessel unlike any other. She was an experimental craft, built to dive deeper than her contemporaries, capable of reaching depths where most submarines could not survive. She carried with her a nuclear reactor and advanced systems, a symbol of technological ambition in the final years of the Cold War. Yet ambition did not protect her. A fire broke out on board, spreading quickly through the compartments, and despite the crew's efforts, control was lost. The Komsomolets slipped beneath the waves, sinking to a depth of 1,680 meters, far beyond the reach of ordinary rescue. Some crew members escaped into lifeboats, but many did not survive the icy waters. For those left behind, the sea became both grave and witness, closing over a submarine that was not only a machine of war but also an experiment in pushing human engineering to its limits. On land, the news shocked the Soviet Union and the world, not only for the loss of life but for the knowledge that a nuclear reactor and nuclear weapons now rested deep in the seabed, beyond recovery. In the years since, the Komsomolets has become more than wreckage. It is an unresolved presence, a reminder that the sea does not merely keep secrets but also holds dangers long after vessels vanish. Inspections of the site have shown traces of radiation leaking slowly into the cold currents, a silent seepage that continues even decades later. The submarine rests like a scar at the bottom of the Norwegian Sea, its hull a monument to both technological pride and vulnerability. The Komsomolets is not remembered only for her sinking, but for the questions she left behind. Can the sea contain what was never meant to be released? Will the silence of the deep keep her forever, or will currents carry her secrets outward? Unlike wrecks that simply fade into history, she remains active in absence, a presence that unsettles as much as it mourns. Even today, her story is not finished, for the ocean is still carrying it forward, one quiet current at a time. In April of 2003, the Chinese submarine 361 was on a routine training exercise in the Yellow Sea. She was not engaged in combat, nor pushing the limits of depth or endurance, only carrying out maneuvers familiar to her crew. But when she failed to make contact as expected, concern began to spread across the fleet. Days later, when she was located and boarded, those who entered her compartments were met with a scene that has lingered in memory as one of the eeriest tragedies in submarine history. The vessel had surfaced on her own, drifting quietly across the water as though waiting. From the outside, nothing suggested disaster. Yet inside, every sailor sat lifeless at his station. They had died where they worked, still in place, still disciplined in their duties even as oxygen ran out. The submarine was filled not with struggle or disorder, but with a silence so complete it felt unnatural, as though time itself had stopped. Later investigations pointed to a mechanical failure in the diesel engines while submerged, causing the crew to suffocate as the air grew unbreathable. But technical explanations could not erase the weight of the image. An entire crew, frozen in their final positions, as if sleep had taken them all at once. The tragedy was not only in the loss of 70 lives, but in the stillness of the discovery, a submarine that had returned to the surface but offered no voices, no movement, no sign of life. The story of Submarine 361 lingers because of this haunting stillness. It is a reminder that not every disaster announces itself with explosions or alarms. Some unfold quietly, invisibly, until silence is all that remains. The vessel's drifting return to the surface becomes almost symbolic, as though the sea itself had released her, but not the men within. A submarine that surfaced, yet never truly returned, carrying only the weight of silence back into the light. The Arctic has always been a place of extremes, a frozen frontier of shifting ice, sudden storms, and waters colder than steel. For the Soviet Navy, it was also a proving ground. Submarines were sent north to patrol beneath the polar ice, to test endurance, and to secure strategic positions. Yet the same qualities that made the Arctic valuable made it merciless. Several Soviet submarines vanished there, swallowed by conditions that allowed no warning, leaving only fragments of record and memory behind. Some disappeared in storms, forced under by waves that shattered even steel hulls. Others may have collided with hidden ice ridges beneath the surface, their paths blocked by frozen walls invisible to sonar. In some cases, mechanical failure in the brutal cold left vessels powerless, drifting until they descended into trenches that remain unreachable. A few names are written in naval lists as lost at sea, their positions marked only by wide guesses across maps of white and gray. No wrecks were found, no survivors returned, and the ice itself became their shroud. The Arctic, in these stories, becomes both a frontier and a tomb. It is a place where navigation pushes against nature's limits, where technology falters in the face of ice that shifts and currents that twist without pattern. For the families of the lost, answers were few, explanations vague. The Soviet Union rarely released details, and secrecy deepened the mystery. For those who waited, the silence of official voices mirrored the silence of the sea itself. Today, some of these submarines remain undiscovered, hidden beneath ice sheets or settled in canyons far below reach. Their absence is not dramatic, but absolute, a reminder of the Arctic's indifference. The North does not yield its secrets easily. For the Soviet submarines that never returned, the Arctic is their final harbor, a vast, frozen silence where the line between frontier and graveyard has blurred forever. In the Soviet Union, the sea's silence was often matched by another silence, that of the state. When submarines failed to return, their loss was not always announced at once. Sometimes years passed before families were told what had happened. In other cases, no full explanation was ever offered, only vague words and official statements that revealed little. For those who waited, this withholding became its own kind of grief, layered over the absence of loved ones already claimed by the ocean. The reasons were many. Military secrecy demanded control of information, especially during the Cold War, when every loss could be read as weakness by rivals. Reports were filtered, details obscured, and sometimes disappearances were not admitted at all. To families, this meant living not only with uncertainty about the sea, but with unanswered questions from their own government. The silence felt doubled, as if both water and authority had closed their doors. For sailors' wives and children, the absence stretched into a haze of rumors. Some whispered of collisions with American submarines, others of internal explosions, still others of disasters no one dared name aloud. In villages and cities across the Soviet Union, grief took place in private, with little ceremony, because no clear truth was given to honor. Memorials were rare, obituaries muted. The vanished submarines became ghosts twice over, gone beneath the sea, and hidden within the folds of secrecy. Even after the Soviet Union dissolved, answers did not always emerge. Some records remained classified, others incomplete, lost to bureaucracy and time. The mystery of these missing crews lingers, not only in the depths where they rest, but in the silence that surrounded their stories on land. For the families, closure never fully came. The sea had taken their loved ones, and the government had taken their certainty. Between the two silences, memory was left to carry what truth it could, whispering through generations the questions that were never answered. In May of 1958, the USS Stickleback was taking part in a training exercise near Hawaii. She was not at war, not on patrol in enemy waters, but simply practicing maneuvers with other vessels of the US Navy. During one of these drills, a torpedo retriever ship struck her by accident. The collision tore open her hull, and within hours, she slipped beneath the waves. The crew managed to escape, rescued by nearby ships, but the submarine herself was lost. In that moment, a vessel meant to vanish by design disappeared for real, leaving nothing visible on the surface but ripples fading into the Pacific. For decades, the Stickleback lay hidden, her resting place uncertain. The Navy recorded her loss, but the sea held her secret. Families who remembered her spoke of the fragility of submarines, how even in times of peace they could be undone in moments. For those who had served aboard her in years before, the knowledge that she was gone without a grave was a lingering wound. It was not until 2017 that the Stickleback was rediscovered. Resting on the seabed more than 3,000 feet below the surface, her hull was found in two sections, preserved by the cold and pressure. The discovery brought a quiet sense of completion. For nearly 60 years she had been part of the ocean's silence, a missing chapter in naval history. To see her again, even through sonar images and deep-sea footage, was to close a story left unfinished for too long. The Stickleback's rediscovery reminds us that not all vanishings are permanent. Some mysteries yield eventually, returning lost vessels to the light of memory. But the years between disappearance and discovery remain dark, years when questions weigh heavily and answers feel impossibly far away. Her story is not just about a wreck found, but about the passage of time itself, the long silence between loss and remembrance, when the ocean held her unseen. In May of 1945, as the Second World War neared its end, the USS Legato was sent on patrol in the Gulf of Thailand. She was part of a coordinated mission with another submarine, tasked with intercepting Japanese convoys still moving through the region. Her last transmission reported sighting a target. After that, nothing more was heard. When the war ended months later, the Legato and her crew of 85 were still listed as missing, their fate unknown. Families received the grim acknowledgement of loss, but no explanation, no place to point to on a map. For 60 years, the Legato remained hidden, part of the ocean's silence. Then in 2005, a team of divers located her resting place deep in the Gulf of Thailand. What they found was a submarine preserved with haunting clarity. Her hull was largely intact, her deck guns still in place, her features instantly recognizable even after decades beneath salt water. She lay quietly on the seabed, as if waiting, her story frozen at the moment of her final dive. Those who entered described an eerie stillness, as though time itself had paused inside her. Personal items were still arranged in their compartments, the structure of the vessel unbroken by collapse. The sea had preserved her not as wreckage scattered, but as a whole, a submarine resting like a memorial carved from steel. For the families of her crew, the discovery gave something more than closure. It gave a place, a tangible site where memory could rest alongside reality. The Legato's rediscovery is a reminder of how the sea both erases and preserves. She vanished into silence for decades, but when found, she appeared almost untouched, as if sealed away. In her stillness lies her power, not just as a lost submarine returned to record, but as a memorial suspended in salt water, carrying the presence of 85 men whose story had remained unfinished until the ocean allowed her to be seen again. In September of 1914, only weeks after the outbreak of the First World War, Australia's first submarine, Mars AE-1, set out on patrol near the Duke of York Islands in Papua New Guinea. She carried 35 men, her journey meant to be routine, her waters thought to be calm. But sometime after her departure, she simply vanished. No distress call was sent, no trace of wreckage floated to the surface. She had disappeared as though swallowed whole, leaving the new nation's navy with a silence it could not explain. The loss of AE-1 was a shock not only for its suddenness but for its timing. She was the pride of a fledgling navy, a symbol of modern strength at a moment when Australia sought to prove itself on the global stage. To lose her without battle, without even a whisper of her final moments, was to face a mystery that weighed on both military and family alike. For decades, speculation filled the gap. Some believed she had struck an uncharted reef. Others suggested mechanical failure, or even a sudden dive beyond her limits. Yet no theory could be confirmed. The ocean held her firmly, and with her, the lives of those aboard. As the years stretched on, the AE-1 became a story told in fragments, part tragedy, part myth. She was searched for many times, but always the sea gave nothing. Entire generations passed, her absence becoming part of naval history, her name remembered but her vessel unseen. Then, in 2017, more than a century after her disappearance, a search team finally found her. Resting intact at a depth of 300 meters, she lay quietly on the seabed, her hull preserved by the cold, her silence finally given a location. The rediscovery brought a solemn sense of completion. After 103 years, the ocean had allowed a glimpse of what it had taken. The AE-1's story lingers as proof of the sea's patience, that it reveals its secrets not when we demand, but when it chooses. For a century, she was absence. Now she is presence once more, a reminder of how long silence can last, and how powerful it is when broken at last. In October of 1943, the USS Wahoo, commanded by the fiery and determined Dudley Mush Morton, entered the Sea of Japan for what would become her final patrol. She was already infamous, credited with sinking numerous enemy ships, her reputation carried on both sides of the Pacific. But after that patrol began, she never returned. No signals came back, no reports reached home, and the Wahoo slipped into silence, leaving her crew of 80 lost without explanation. For decades, the mystery of the Wahoo lingered. American records showed her last known position, but no confirmation of her fate. Japanese reports, meanwhile, told of a submarine attacked by aircraft and depth charges in the same waters, but there was no certainty that it was her. Each side held fragments of the story, incomplete pieces that could not confirm one another. Families were left with the same void as countless others, an absence where memory had to take the place of truth. The years stretched on, and the Wahoo became a name carved into stone memorials, a vessel remembered more in legend than in detail. Yet beneath the waves, her steel remained, waiting. In 2005, after coordinated efforts between American and Japanese search teams, the wreck of the Wahoo was finally found in the La Perouse Strait. Resting quietly on the seabed, her hull bore the marks of the attacks that had ended her patrol. At last, both accounts met in a single, silent reality. Her rediscovery was more than revelation, it was reconciliation. The joint search brought together former enemies, each carrying their own memory of the war, united in honoring the men who had been lost. For the families, there was a measure of closure, a sense that after decades of uncertainty, their loved ones were no longer adrift in rumor but anchored in truth. The Wahoo's story remains tragic, but her return to record became a reminder that even in silence, memory can bridge divides, and the ocean, when it chooses to give back, can heal as well as conceal. There are moments in the histories of vanished submarines when silence is interrupted not by discovery, but by rumor. Long after a vessel has been declared lost, there have been whispers of sightings, fleeting shapes glimpsed at sea, reports of periscopes cutting briefly through the waves, sonar echoes that hint at a presence where no submarine should be. These claims rarely hold against investigation, yet they linger, carried by the imagination of sailors and coastal communities who live close to the rhythms of the ocean. Some speak of submarines surfacing in distant waters, their identities unclear, their outlines resembling those long believed gone. Others tell of radio signals faintly received, as though voices from a vanished crew still called out across static. In fishing towns, stories circulate of ghostly shadows beneath the boats, sliding silently past before vanishing into the depths. The tales rarely align with fact, but they fill a void that official records cannot, the aching uncertainty of loss without answer. The families of the lost are often drawn to such stories, not because they believe them fully, but because they offer a fragile thread of possibility. In the long stretches of waiting, any suggestion that a loved one might still be alive, adrift, or reaching out softens the silence. Folklore grows naturally in these spaces, transforming grief into narrative, rumor into legend. To reflect on these ghostly sightings is not to dismiss them, but to understand their place. They are less about submarines and more about the human need to imagine survival when faced with absence. The ocean gives no explanations, so imagination provides them instead. Whether error, illusion, or hope taking shape on the horizon, such stories weave themselves into the wider fabric of disappearance. They remind us that silence is not always empty. It can be filled with rumor and with dreams, echoes of lives that the sea has taken but memory has not yet let go. Beneath the calm surface of the ocean lies a world of forces unseen, movements and patterns that remain mysterious even now. Submarines vanish not only through mechanical failure or combat, but sometimes in ways that suggest the sea itself holds deeper powers we do not yet understand. Among these possibilities are magnetic anomalies, rogue currents, and trenches so unexplored they remain almost like other worlds. Each offers a reminder that the ocean is more than water. It is a shifting system of hidden energies. Magnetic anomalies occur when the Earth's natural fields twist and bend, often influenced by the iron-rich crust beneath the seafloor. For a submarine navigating by compass or sensitive instruments, these distortions can mislead, pulling it off course or creating sudden confusion in navigation. In regions where these anomalies are strong, sailors have long reported strange readings, compasses that spin or point no way at all. A vessel traveling blindly into such zones might disappear without ever knowing how far astray it had wandered. There are also the great ocean currents, invisible rivers that move through the sea with power stronger than wind. Some are charted and predictable, but others remain unstable, shifting with storms, temperature, and pressure. A submarine caught in one of these deep currents could be pulled off course into unfamiliar waters, driven far from where searchers expect to find it. In narrow straits or along continental shelves, such forces could even drag a vessel down into terrain from which it could not escape. And then there are the trenches, vast canyons deeper than mountains are tall, places still largely unmeasured. A submarine that slips into one of these chasms might never be seen again. Pressure, darkness, and depth combine to make recovery impossible, turning disappearance into permanence. These regions are reminders of how much of the ocean remains beyond our reach. Perhaps some vanishings are not failures of machines or men, but encounters with mysteries the sea has not yet explained. Magnetic shadows, wandering currents, abyssal valleys, each possibility reflects how little we truly know. The ocean hides more than steel hulls, it hides its own nature, and within that hidden nature, submarines may vanish into silence without ever leaving a trace. Beneath the seabed, in cold and pressurized layers of sediment, lie deposits of methane hydrates, crystalline structures that trap gas in frozen form. For the most part, they rest quietly, sealed away by the weight of water and earth. But sometimes these deposits destabilize. When they do, the ocean exhales. Vast bubbles of methane can erupt upward, rushing through the water with force strong enough to disturb whatever floats or travels above. It is a natural phenomenon, silent until it begins, sudden when it arrives. For ships on the surface, the danger lies in buoyancy. If enough gas rises, it can change the density of the water itself, turning the sea beneath a vessel into something too thin to hold its weight. A ship caught in such a patch could sink abruptly, vanishing without storm or warning. Though rarely documented, the possibility lingers, part of the quiet explanations sometimes offered for disappearances where no other cause is clear. For submarines, the effect might be different but just as dangerous. A sudden rush of gas could create turbulence in surrounding waters, pushing a vessel off balance or driving it into depths beyond its limits. Sensors might misread the shifting density, engines might strain against forces they cannot control. In moments, a submarine could find itself descending too quickly, falling into pressure that steel cannot resist. These ideas remain speculative. Few direct observations confirm such events, and the ocean offers no easy proof. Yet in places where methane hydrates are known to lie in abundance, off continental shelves, along fault lines, the thought persists that the sea itself can breathe in ways destructive to those who travel through it. It is less a theory of sabotage or failure than of nature's hidden rhythms. To imagine submarines undone by methane eruptions is to accept that the sea does not need conflict to create loss. It sometimes exhales disasters of its own, indifferent and unseen. In these moments, vanishings may not be mysteries of machines, but expressions of the ocean's restless breath, rising suddenly from the depths and leaving silence behind. The ocean is a world of sound. Light cannot travel far through water, but sound carries, echoing across miles, bending with currents, slipping along thermoclines like whispers through corridors. Submarines depend on these echoes to navigate, to detect, to survive. Yet within this world of sound there are places where echoes fade, where signals vanish, where detection fails. These are called acoustic shadows, regions of silence hidden inside the sea. To enter them is to disappear, not in body but in presence, as though stepping momentarily into another dimension. For a submarine, drifting into such a shadow can mean blindness. Sonar pings sent outward return nothing, as though the ocean itself has closed its ears. Surrounding vessels, too, may lose track, their listening stations falling silent, their screens blank. A submarine might still move through the water, intact and real, but to the acoustic world it no longer exists. For an enemy, this might be opportunity. For the vessel itself, it might be danger, the sudden loss of awareness in a realm where awareness is survival. Some believe that acoustic shadows have played a role in submarine disappearances. A vessel may have strayed too far off course while instruments faltered, or collided unseen with another ship traveling in its own silence. Others imagine that submarines lost in these shadows remained undetected during critical failures, their distress calls never reaching the surface because sound itself refused to carry. Scientists know that these acoustic shadows form where layers of water with different temperatures or densities meet, bending sound into paths that leave pockets of stillness. Yet for those who live by the sea, the effect feels more like enchantment, a place where things slip away from notice, a silence deeper than the silence of depth itself. To reflect on these vanishings is not to insist on supernatural answers, but to recognize how strange the ocean's physics can be. A submarine might remain whole and real, yet still vanish, becoming absent in the very medium it depends on. In these moments, disappearance is not only a matter of steel and water, but of sound itself, a silence shaped into shadow, a reminder that the sea can conceal in ways beyond sight. Throughout the 20th century, submarines were more than tools of war. They were laboratories, floating platforms for experiments that pushed the limits of science and secrecy. In the stillness beneath the sea, navies tested new engines, new weapons, new systems of survival. Some of these tests succeeded, their results written into the long story of technological progress. Others ended differently, in silence, with submarines that did not return. Their disappearances were recorded as accidents, their details hidden behind sealed reports. For the families of the crews, explanations came slowly, if at all. For the wider world, many of these stories remain untold, swallowed by both the ocean and bureaucracy. Submarines have tested nuclear propulsion, deep-diving hulls, and missile systems designed to operate far below the surface. Each experiment carried risk, pushing machines and men into environments where error could not be forgiven. Sometimes failures were visible, marked by explosions or wreckage that washed ashore. But other times, the end was invisible. A submarine on a secret trial might vanish in deep waters, its mission never fully admitted, its loss attributed to something vague. Official silence covered what the sea already concealed. The Cold War intensified this shadow. Both East and West raced to develop systems beyond the reach of rivals, and submarines were central to this hidden contest. Some were equipped with experimental weapons never used in conflict. Others tested extreme endurance or navigated under polar ice where no charts yet existed. In such conditions, disappearance was not unthinkable. Yet when it happened, the truth was rarely shared. To admit the cause was to reveal too much, to expose programs meant to remain unseen. It is possible that some vanished submarines rest not only as casualties of ocean and pressure, but as casualties of secrecy. Their stories may still exist in locked archives, their final hours documented in reports stamped classified, unread by those who grieve. Until those records surface, if they ever do, the mysteries remain layered, steel hidden beneath water, truth hidden beneath silence. To reflect on these disappearances is to acknowledge that not all mysteries belong to the ocean alone. Some belong to human institutions, to decisions made in quiet offices, to secrets held for reasons long forgotten. The ocean keeps the vessels. Bureaucracy keeps their stories. Between the two, families and history are left with absence, unanswered, unacknowledged, and enduring. The ocean is not only water and depth. It is an archive, a vast vault that holds what the world has lost. Beneath its shifting surface lie centuries of wreckage, ships of wood and steel, aircraft swallowed by storms, cities claimed by tides. Among these are the submarines, vessels built for secrecy, now resting in silence. Each one becomes more than a machine. It becomes an artifact, a fragment of history sealed in pressure, guarded by currents, preserved by the indifference of the sea. Unlike libraries or museums, the ocean does not arrange what it keeps. It does not display or interpret. It gathers everything indiscriminately, a trawler beside a frigate, a submarine beside a coral reef. Once taken, these objects rest together in darkness, stripped of context but not of meaning. The water erases detail, yet in doing so it grants another form of preservation. A submarine lying at 1,000 meters is not rusting into nothingness overnight. It is waiting, intact enough to be recognized decades later, a capsule of time that holds the silence of its last moments. Every vanished submarine becomes part of this hidden collection. They are unvisited memorials, unmarked tombs, archives that cannot be opened without immense effort. And even when they are found, the ocean does not give them freely. Divers see only fragments, sonar only outlines. Much remains withheld, kept in the secrecy of silt and darkness. The ocean shows enough to remind us of what lies within, but never enough to release the whole truth. To imagine the sea as archive is to accept its dual nature. It is both preserver and destroyer, both witness and concealment. It holds the USS Scorpion beside the K-129, the AE-1 beside the Legato, all equally silent, all equally beyond reach. In this way, the ocean writes its own history, one without words, one measured not in books but in absences. The ocean does not explain. It does not tell us why a submarine failed, or how its crew spent their final minutes. It offers only the artifact itself, hidden in silence, waiting for those who seek. Every vanished vessel rests as both evidence and mystery, part of the greatest archive we will never fully read, the archive of the deep. Along the coasts where the sea is both workplace and companion, fishermen have long told stories of things seen and heard that defy explanation. From Norway's grey fjords to the fishing grounds of Japan, whispers surface of ghost submarines, vessels that appear where no patrol should be, periscopes glimpsed rising in still waters, or sudden sonar pings that vanish before they can be traced. These tales exist not in naval archives but in the quiet talk of harbors, passed between generations as calmly as the tide itself. Some fishermen speak of long shadows moving beneath their nets, the shape unmistakably that of a submarine. Others recall nights when the water was still, yet they swore they felt the vibration of engines just below, a presence moving without light or surface disturbance. There are reports of periscopes sliding up into view, lingering for a moment, and then sinking again without a ripple. Yet when they checked later, no submarine had been logged in the area, no exercise announced, no vessel accounted for. Skeptics suggest illusions. Schools of whales mistaken for hulls, drifting debris misread as periscopes, sonar bouncing against rocks and currents. These explanations are reasonable, yet they do not erase the persistence of the stories. They live on because they carry something deeper than fact, the sense that the ocean is never fully empty, that presences remain even when vessels have long since vanished. For coastal communities, these ghost submarines become part of a parallel history. Where official records speak of losses, disappearances, and wrecks, the tales speak of returns, of submarines that do not stay buried, of shadows that rise briefly before fading again into silence. They are not proof, but they are memory, shaped into story. In the end, whether imagination or something more, the ghost submarines of fishermen's tales belong alongside the official lists. They are reminders that the sea does not give us only facts. It gives us impressions, echoes, and mysteries that live in human retelling. Between sonar charts and folklore, between steel records and whispered sightings, the story of vanished submarines drifts on, carried by both the waves and the voices of those who work upon them. There are places in the ocean where eras meet, where the remains of modern submarines rest near ruins that were already ancient before steel was ever forged. Divers who explore such sites describe the strange juxtaposition. A broken hull lying in the silt beside stone columns or weathered walls, the relic of one age beside the ghost of another. In these moments, the sea reveals its indifference to time. It erases centuries without preference, carrying wooden ships, stone cities, and steel war machines into the same silence. In the Mediterranean, scattered wrecks of wartime submarines have been found not far from collapsed harbors of the classical world. In the Pacific, lost vessels sometimes lie close to reefs where human habitation once stood before being drowned by rising seas. These unlikely neighbors are not arranged by intent, but by chance, yet they create an atmosphere heavy with meaning. A submarine, vanishing in the 20th century, becomes part of a story that also includes temples and walls from millennia past. The presence of both ruins and wrecks in the same waters underscores the timeless nature of disappearance. An empire may fall, a fleet may sink, a city may be claimed by tides, but the ocean receives them all in equal measure. What was once sacred stone now rests beside rusting torpedo tubes, both guarded by currents and silence. The sea does not choose what to preserve or what to reveal. It holds them together, history layered without distinction. For those who encounter these places, the impression is one of humility. Human achievement, whether carved in stone or built in steel, is equally fragile against water's persistence. The ruins and the submarines both remind us that nothing escapes the slow erasure of the deep. In their stillness, they speak the same language of silence. Modern loss beside ancient disappearance becomes a single truth, that the ocean takes, keeps, and conceals without regard for time. The Bermuda Triangle returns often in conversations about disappearances, its name carrying a weight far beyond its geography. Between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, the stretch of ocean has become a shorthand for mystery, a place where ships and submarines are said to vanish without cause. For some, it is a story of compasses spinning wildly, of sudden storms, of vessels swallowed whole by unseen forces. Yet when we reflect more calmly, the Bermuda Triangle is less about proving strange phenomena and more about understanding why we invent myths at all. When a submarine fails to return, its absence is almost unbearable. Families search for reasons, sailors trade theories, and the imagination turns restlessly over the silence. Myths arise in these spaces because they provide something that official records cannot, a sense of narrative. To say a vessel vanished in the Bermuda Triangle is not to explain its loss, but to give its absence a name, to soften the edges of uncertainty with story. The truth is that the triangle is no more dangerous than other stretches of ocean. Storms, currents, and accidents occur everywhere, and submarines have disappeared across the globe. But the myth endures because it fulfills a need. It acknowledges our awareness of the unknown, our recognition that the sea is vast and often beyond control. In the absence of certainty, people lean toward wonder, shaping absence into legend. For submarines linked to the Bermuda myth, the story is less about their exact fate than about what they represent. They become part of a larger narrative where the ocean is alive with secrets, where vanishing is not failure but mystery. In that way, the Bermuda Triangle is not so much a location as a symbol. It reminds us of the stories we create to live with loss, of how we make mystery bearable by clothing it in myth. For the families of sailors lost at sea, absence rarely ends with silence alone. In the months and years that follow a disappearance, dreams often rise to fill the space left behind. Wives, children, and parents speak of visions in which their loved ones return, not as ghosts to frighten, but as presences that comfort, explain, or simply remain. In these dreams, the lost are alive again, moving through kitchens, walking across thresholds, or appearing at the foot of beds with a calm familiarity. They become part of night's language, woven into the private world of sleep. Some describe their sailors as unchanged, smiling, dressed in uniform, still carrying the warmth of recognition. Others see them in different settings, seated at a table, or standing quietly on a distant shore, looking back as though waiting. These visions rarely offer answers. They do not explain how a submarine vanished or what its final moments were like. Instead, they grant a sense of presence, a fragile continuation that lingers beyond waking hours. Over time, these dreams take on the weight of their own mythology. They become part of the story families tell, not as evidence but as memory. Children who never knew their fathers grow up hearing of how they appeared in dreams, how they smiled, how they reassured. For the families, the submarine itself transforms, no longer just a machine lost in deep water, but a vessel of spirits, carrying voices that still reach across the divide of death and absence. Such dreams do not lessen grief, but they reshape it. They give the lost a place to exist outside of wreckage and official reports, allowing love to remain unbroken by distance or silence. In this way, the submarine is not only wreckage resting on the seabed, it becomes a spiritual presence, a quiet companion that lives on in visions. The dreams of the deep remind us that absence is not empty. It is filled with memory, longing, and the fragile, luminous visits of those who are never entirely gone. When a submarine vanishes, it leaves no cairn on a hillside, no marker in a field. Its grave lies hidden beneath miles of water, invisible to those who remain above. Yet societies have always found ways to chart such losses, to give them form through memory. Monuments rise in quiet towns, memorial walls carry long lists of names, and plaques stand along coastal promenades where families once watched for vessels that never returned. These markers become their own kind of navigation, charting absence not on sea charts but across time. In Portsmouth, in Brest, in Pearl Harbor, in Vladivostok, stone and bronze recall crews who disappeared without trace. Some memorials are grand, with carved figures and eternal flames. Others are modest, a plaque fixed to a church wall, a statue overlooking a harbor, a name etched into a local roll of honor. Yet each one anchors memory to place, making absence visible to generations who did not know the sailors but inherit their silence. Naval institutions also record these vanishings. Marble walls carry hundreds of names, silent registers of lives lost beneath the sea. Families visit, running their fingers over the engraved letters, tracing the outline of fathers, brothers, and sons. In these gestures, memory becomes touch, a way of bridging the distance that water has made permanent. Even in small fishing villages, where submarines once sailed past on their way to deeper waters, local people have placed markers. A stone on a pier, a plaque on a seawall, a cross on a headland, each one says quietly that this is where waiting ended, where hope turned into remembrance. Memory is a kind of navigation. It guides us not across seas but through time, connecting past and present, silence and voice. Every monument and plaque is a point on this invisible chart, mapping vanished submarines not where they rest in darkness, but where their stories continue in light. In this way, memory charts what maps cannot, the enduring presence of those who vanished, carried not by steel, but by the people who refused to let them drift away. When a submarine vanishes, it leaves no cairn on a hillside, no marker in a field. Its grave lies hidden beneath miles of water, invisible to those who remain above. Yet societies have always found ways to chart such losses, to give them form through memory. Monuments rise in quiet towns, memorial walls carry long lists of names, and plaques stand along coastal promenades where families once watched for vessels that never returned. These markers become their own kind of navigation, charting absence not on sea charts but across time. In Portsmouth, in Brest, in Pearl Harbor, in Vladivostok, stone and bronze recall crews who disappeared without trace. Some memorials are grand, with carved figures and eternal flames. Others are modest, a plaque fixed to a church wall, a statue overlooking a harbor, a name etched into a local roll of honor. Yet each one anchors memory to place, making absence visible to generations who did not know the sailors but inherit their silence. Naval institutions also record these vanishings. Marble walls carry hundreds of names, silent registers of lives lost beneath the sea. Families visit, running their fingers over the engraved letters, tracing the outline of fathers, brothers, and sons. In these gestures, memory becomes touch, a way of bridging the distance that water has made permanent. Even in small fishing villages, where submarines once sailed past on their way to deeper waters, local people have placed markers. A stone on a pier, a plaque on a seawall, a cross on a headland, each one says quietly that this is where waiting ended, where hope turned into remembrance. Memory is a kind of navigation. It guides us not across seas but through time, connecting past and present, silence and voice. Every monument and plaque is a point on this invisible chart, mapping vanished submarines not where they rest in darkness, but where their stories continue in light. In this way, memory charts what maps cannot, the enduring presence of those who vanished, carried not by steel, but by the people who refused to let them drift away. Submarines are born from silence. They are machines designed to slip beneath the sea unseen, to move without trace, to disappear deliberately as part of their very purpose. Unlike ships that signal their presence with wakes and sails, submarines are meant to leave no mark on the surface. They live in shadow, listening more than speaking, built to pass like whispers through the ocean's vast body. Silence is not a byproduct of their design, it is their essence. And yet, when they vanish entirely, that silence deepens into something heavier. A submarine lost is not only an absence of sound but an absence of certainty, of closure, of return. It is silence stretched to infinity, where no signal rises, no debris surfaces, no message arrives. Families wait for words that never come, governments issue reports filled with ellipses, and the sea keeps its mouth closed. The submarine becomes a symbol twice over, first of intended silence, then of permanent silence. Their disappearances amplify what they already embodied. To lose a ship on the surface leaves wreckage, cries, perhaps survivors who can speak. To lose a submarine leaves nothing. The ocean erases the moment as if it never occurred, returning the surface to calm within minutes. What remains is a vessel of silence, multiplied and extended until it echoes only in imagination and memory. For this reason, submarines hold a particular place in the human mind. They are not only tools of war or exploration, they are metaphors for absence itself. Each one lost becomes a reminder that silence is not empty, but full of unanswered questions, full of lives left unspoken, full of mysteries the sea has chosen not to return. In this way, submarines as symbols of silence extend beyond their technology. They show us how fragile human presence is against the vastness of water, how quickly noise and voice can vanish. They remind us that silence is not only a condition of the deep, but the final shape of disappearance. What they embody in design, they fulfill in loss, leaving behind a silence amplified beyond measure. On shorelines across the world, the story of vanished submarines is written not only in steel but in human lives. For every vessel that failed to return, there were families waiting, wives who stood at kitchen windows listening for news, children who scanned the horizon for ships they would never see again, parents who kept photographs on mantels long after hope had dimmed. These lives are part of the story, woven into the silence left by the ocean. Some waited by harbors, watching the calm water as if it might change. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, yet the habit of waiting often lingered. A knock at the door, a letter in the post, even a footstep on the path could stir hope that the silence had ended. When the Navy came, it was rarely with answers. Official words spoke of loss, of missing, presumed lost, but never of what had truly happened. Grief was asked to live alongside uncertainty, a weight that did not lessen with time. Children grew up carrying stories rather than memories, their fathers present in tales but absent in life. Some lit candles, others built small shrines, gestures of remembrance that gave form to what the sea had taken. Wives and mothers found strength in community, in sharing sorrow with others who also waited, binding grief into solidarity. In coastal towns, memorials were not just public markers but personal companions, places where families could stand in silence together. The patience of these families is its own kind of courage. They endured not only the loss of loved ones, but the absence of closure, the knowledge that the ocean does not give back easily. Their hope, even when fragile, carried them through years of not knowing. And their grief, though heavy, became part of the larger story, reminding us that submarines are not only steel machines but vessels filled with lives that ripple outward into generations. To reflect on the families left ashore is to see the human side of mystery. The vanished submarines do not rest alone in the deep. They are accompanied by voices that still speak their names, by love that refuses to vanish. In harbors, in towns, in households far from the sea, the silence continues, not only in the depths, but on land, where patience, grief, and memory weave quietly into the narrative. The ocean keeps a ledger, though not one written in ink or bound in paper. It is a ledger of absence, of vessels that entered its depths and never returned. Among them are dozens of submarines still undiscovered, their coordinates unmarked, their final moments unrevealed. Each one is a page in the ocean's great archive, an entry half-written, a chapter left unopened. They rest in silence, unread by human eyes, waiting for the day the sea may allow them to be found. These submarines exist as names on lists, carved into marble, recorded in naval logs. Yet their physical presence is hidden, their steel husks folded into the dark, their crews forever beyond reach. For families, the absence feels like an unfinished sentence, a story without an ending. For historians, it is a reminder of how much remains unknown. And for the ocean itself, it is nothing unusual. It holds them as it holds everything, without judgment or urgency, time folding around them as easily as the tide folds around stone. Each undiscovered wreck is a possibility, a question mark on the map. Somewhere in trenches, on continental shelves, or beneath drifting sands, the submarines endure. They may be perfectly preserved or broken into fragments, but either way, they remain present, waiting. To find one is to close a page, but dozens more remain closed, their silence intact. The ledger is unfinished not because the ocean cannot reveal, but because it does not choose to reveal all at once. Its archive is too vast, its patience too deep. Human eyes may one day trace more of its entries, but for now, many remain sealed. In this way, the ocean keeps its balance, giving enough to remind us of what lies below, withholding enough to maintain its mystery. The submarines still missing are not lost in the truest sense. They are present, resting in the ocean's care, their stories unwritten only because we have yet to turn the page. They wait in the great ledger of the sea, unfinished, unforgotten, part of a record that will never be fully read. In the end, the story of vanished submarines is not only about steel or machinery, nor even about strategy or war. It is about silence, and how silence becomes a presence of its own. Each submarine that disappears does so twice, first in the physical sense, as a vessel sliding beneath the waves, and then in the metaphoric sense, as a reminder of human fragility against forces larger than ourselves. The ocean does not need intention to claim them. It simply holds them, as it holds so much else, in quiet patience. These submarines are more than wrecks. They are symbols of how easily ambition and bravery can dissolve into absence. They remind us that our greatest technologies, built with care and strength, remain vulnerable to the vast indifference of water. Within their hulls were lives, laughter, and voices that carried hope into confined corridors. When they vanish, what remains is not only wreckage but the echo of what was human, the unanswered conversations, the dreams interrupted, the waiting families left ashore. The ocean keeps its silence. It does not explain, it does not confess. It allows only glimpses, a rediscovered wreck here, a sonar image there, but never the full story. What lies inside those final moments belongs to the sea, and perhaps always will. Yet in this silence, there is also calm. To accept that some mysteries remain unresolved is to share, in some way, the patience of the ocean itself. As the meditation draws to its close, we are left not with solutions but with stillness. The vanished submarines remain where they are, unseen, unheard, part of the great quiet archive beneath the waves. Their stories linger in memory, in dreams, in whispers passed down through families and folklore. And in that lingering, they continue to exist, not as solved mysteries, but as companions to our imagination. Silence beyond the hull is not empty. It is full of presence, of memory, of wonder. The ocean holds it gently, and in listening to that silence, we too are reminded of our place within its vastness. Mysteries unresolved, but embraced, leaving us with a final calm that drifts like the tide.